It is reasonable to say that most people, either within or outside of the scientific community, have heard of the word evolution. This topic has created unrest in schools, controversy amongst religion, and has been widely misconstrued over the years. But what does it actually mean to evolve, and why do organisms need to? The term evolution refers to a cumulative change in an organism's characteristics over several generations. That being said, since evolution is a long process, it can be difficult to observe in day to day life. If seeing is believing, it is understandable for people to have their doubts about the legitimacy of evolution. But what if we were able to observe the impact of one species' evolutionary characteristics on another species? Coevolution occurs when two or perhaps even more species affect one another's evolution. This typically stems from some sort of existing relationship, such as mutualism, parasitism, or competition. For some species, the ability to change certain characteristics over time is crucial for the survival of not only themselves but also the species they are entangled with. A fascinating example of this is the relationship between fig trees and their pollinators, wasps. Essentially, the fig tree allows wasps to lay eggs within the ovules of their figs, given that the wasp is in turn pollinating those flowers. The female wasp carrying pollen will enter an unripe fig through an opening called the ostiole. She will then lay her eggs in some of the flowers inside of the fig. These flowers will form into what is called a gall that holds the eggs. The non-parasitized flowers, so those not containing any larvae, are pollinated and produce seeds for the tree. Male wasps will emerge first, fertilize the female wasp before they even hatch, and dig escape tunnels for the females before dying inside the fig. Simultaneously, male flowers have matured, so when the females hatch, they are coated in pollen before exiting the fig, thus starting the process over again. So how is this an example of coevolution rather than a symbiotic relationship? Coevolution always leads to speciation, which occurs when a group of organisms within a species develop characteristics that set them apart from the rest of the species, therefore creating a new species entirely. This relationship between the fig tree and wasp is highly specific to the species involved. Across different species of fig plants, you will find that the opening to the fig varies in width or shape based on which species of wasp is the pollinator. In addition, rather than using all of the ovules within the fig, wasps will intentionally choose a short-styled flower because the eggs develop better. If the specified wasp knows how to only choose the short-styled flowers, what could be responsible for any extra larvae? In this diagram, yellow galls represent the short-styled flowers typically used for laying eggs, while the red refer to seeds used by cheater wasps. Many wasps have developed a parasitic adaptation in order to deposit eggs without crawling into the fig, where they will certainly die, as seen on the left. If there are larvae in other tall-styled flowers, the fig plant is able to sense the difference and will drop the figs before larvae can hatch. A similar example of coevolution occurs between Yucca filamentosa and the yucca moth. Yucca plants depend on the yucca moth as their main agent of pollination, and in return, these moths depend on yucca fruit as a source of food. When it is flowering time, the female wasp will gather a mass of pollen from the yucca's anthers. She will then fly it to another yucca flower and deposit a number of eggs into the ovary. Next, she will place the pollen mass onto the stigma. This ensures pollination. Then the ovules will develop into seeds. As these seeds grow in size, they eventually will become a food source for the moth larva. Many of the seeds will not be injured and will eventually be dispersed and produce new plants. Once the larvae have matured, they will leave the seed capsule, drop to the ground, and pupate. Yucca plants only have moth pollinators, and yucca moth larvae only eat the seeds of the yucca fruit. Yucca moths also release a specific pheromone that is only detectable to other moths of the same species, which moderates the number of larvae that are able to hatch within a flower, and this prevents the plant from aborting the flower. Aborting the flower occurs if too many eggs are laid, so yucca plants are exclusively pollinated by one species of moth. Another more simple, straightforward example of coevolution occurs between bees and flowering plants. Because bees are better able to perceive traits such as bilateral symmetry or blue and yellow colors, plants that are bee-pollinated will favor those traits over time. Flowers also have preferences on which bee pollinates them, such as their body shape or the hairs on their bodies that will pick up and deliver pollen to other flowers. These particular preferences will eventually result in speciation. So far, we have discussed coevolution as it relates to a more mutualistic relationship where both species involve benefit. However, coevolution can also be fueled by a competitive relationship as well. For example, African honey badgers feed on honey and have adapted longer claws to reach hives that are up higher, sharper teeth to tear through these hives, and thicker skin that makes them practically immune to bee stings. African honeybees, on the other hand, have come up with a more creative way to defend themselves given the badger's immunity to stings. Since a single sting has no effect, the bees will instead swarm the badger. When a bee dies, it releases a particular pheromone signaling to other bees to swarm. As we can see in the case of plants and their pollinators, as well as the African honey badger and the honey bee, it is imperative that coevolutionary species are able to adapt and change with their counterparts. Otherwise, neither species will be able to reproduce or survive. Our delicate, complicated planet is constantly changing, so all living things that call Earth home will continue to evolve and change too.